No one can preach to me. That's Benjamin Netanyahu talking to the American president like, how dare you suggest that I not do something or that I do something I don't want to do. Nobody is going to tell me what to do while I'm telling you what you're going to do and while I'm demanding that you give me the things that I want you to give to me. We are going to see how the defiant Netanyahu is really causing lots of problems for the United States, but much more importantly, it's causing problems for the Palestinian people who are desperately waiting for some kind of relief to stop the daily killing that's going on, and apparently now not just in the Gaza Strip, but also in the West Bank as Israel steps up its incursions into that area as well. And to help unpack this, I got one of the best people on this issue right now, and that's Matthew Hoh, former State Department official, former combat Marine, and good close friend of mine. Great guy. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, thanks for having me back on, Danny.
Yeah, and like we were talking about before, I was thinking, man, I need to go get some whiskey or something for my coffee cup or something to do this episode here, and maybe I need a little counseling just to kind of keep my composure so I don't get too upset because there's going to be a lot of room for that today. But that's why we're glad to have you here to help make sense of all the things we got going on.
Yeah, I know. I've got I've got over here these prayer beads. Friend gave me in Iraq, and maybe I should be using these worry beads, as they can be called, right? To kind of, keep myself in check and to calm myself down and to remain present with what we're trying to accomplish here, because this is just infuriating. And the disrespect, I think that's probably a good word to describe how the public at large, whether we're interested and concerned and paying attention as you and I and Gary and all the viewers and listeners are, or just kind of going on with our lives, but the disrespect towards us from all corners of this thing, whether it's from the Israelis, whether it's from the Americans. I mean, we had a reprieve, Danny. We were pretty good. I was wondering why am I doing a little better these last couple weeks? It's because the State Department hadn't had a press briefing in like 2 weeks. So we weren't subjected to like Matt Miller just, urinating on our legs and telling us it's raining on a daily basis, right? I mean, so now that's back. So I've got a little bit of a headache now, and everything else. But or it's the media. You look at the way, say, the New York Times reports, continues to report this genocide in Gaza. The way that cable news networks, or then you subject yourself to X or whatnot, Twitter. And so I think we have to all be aware of what we're doing and who we're up against, and that we have to try and not take this personally, to stay objective, to stay detached, to try and look at it, even if we're just consuming the information, to look at it as if this is just a job, right? I mean, that's impossible to do because of the moral horror of what we're standing up against, but we have to kind of keep that mindset and be professional about it. So we've got to take breaks from it. We've got to, not get emotionally outraged, which we are certainly right to do. Anger, of course, in these circumstances, whether it's the slaughter, the massacre, the murder that we're witnessing, or the things coming from a Netanyahu or a Biden that are just incredible insults, so disrespectful to anybody with a brain. So we have to this is going
to be a real test for you, because I have Netanyahu, Biden, and Matt Miller all to subject upon you here. So we'll see how you are at the end of this episode.
Saying all that to everyone watching and listening, if I have a breakdown halfway through it, at least give me some credit for trying.
You did. You're giving it your best shot there, and that's all we can ask for here. But let's let the testing begin. So first of all, let's start with the President of the United States, because he's getting a little aggravated. Watch this.
Are you planning to present a final hostage deal to the both sides this week?
We're very close to that.
What makes you think that this deal will be successful in a way that the other deals were not?
Hope springs eternal.
Mr. President, do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
Do you have a message for the hostages' family, sir?
Yes, I've spoken to the American hostage. I spoke to his mom and dad, and we're not giving up. We're going to continue to push as hard as we can.
Okay, so Let me just kind of sum up there. So he's basically saying we've been trying all this time, and we're going to keep pushing as hard as we can because this is just an intractable situation that he doesn't seem to be able to crack. And yet, this is the same guy who wants to stand up just a few months ago and point a bony finger in the face and talk about how great we are, how much power we have, when he said this.
We don't walk away from our allies. We stand with them. We don't let tyrants win. We oppose them. We don't merely watch global events unfold. We shape them. That's what it means to be the indispensable nation. That's what it means to be the world's superpower and the world's leading democracy.
The world's leading democracy, the world's leading superpower. We're the greatest nation in the history of the world, he has said on previous clips that we've shown here. And yet he can't get Netanyahu to do anything he wants, and there is no hostage deal. And so this guy's dead because nobody could make the hostage deal happen. How do you see it?
I see it the same way you do, Danny. And I see this type of mania, this fever that infests these people, whether it's a personal nature, or institutional, or because it's driven by their allegiance to the empire, and to the narratives and the conditioning that they've endured their entire life, so they can't see the world any other way. But we could bump it up a notch. And a week and a half ago or so, the New York Times, David Sanger reported that the United States has amended its nuclear war policies, and that we are now have a policy that says we can now fight 3 nuclear wars, whether they're concurrent, or whether they're consecutive, or they're simultaneous, concurrent to one another. So, I mean, you could see that even in the most drastic ways, where we have a leadership in this country, and this is a foreign policy leadership that spans both parties, that believes that we are capable of anything, including fighting 3 nuclear wars at one time. So, of course, in their minds, when they talk about Hamas and the Palestinians, of course, we can do anything we want. How could those people stand up to us? And of course, Danny, you and I have firsthand experience with that, with our leadership in Iraq and Afghanistan. How could these people here, how could those people there have defeated us? Right? I mean, so there is a hubris here that is just, it's the hey, it says in the Bible, pride leadeth to downfall, or pride comes before the downfall, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and we have a whole lot of that. So I just want to start with that angry Biden and this defiant Biden, because he's talking like we have all this power, which apparently has no limits, and yet we can't get the least thing done. So what did that anger, what kind of impact did that have on the target, which was Benjamin Netanyahu? I don't think I have to tell you, but watch it from his own mouth.
There's no one else more committed to the release of hostages than me. There's nobody who's fighting for the release of hostages, and I was injured when releasing hostages, so nobody can preach to me about that. I think that my option of being adamant and exerting pressure, that's the way to do it, and not weakness and surrendering after they massacred us. Absolutely not.
So let me ask you that question. I mean, let's just take it at face value. He says nobody wants those hostages to get released more than I do, and we're doing everything we can. Is he telling the truth?
No, I can't. I mean, there's no indication that he's telling the truth. I mean, he's done nothing but one maneuver, one action, one statement after another for these last almost 11 months now, where he has just sabotaged any type of ceasefire agreement that would lead to the Israelis getting their people back. We have to remember that the only time the Israelis got their people back en masse, so Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and the mobs that came out of Gaza took more than 200, I think it was 240 hostages. And in November we had a ceasefire. They had a ceasefire there that lasted for 5-6 days, and 110 hostages were returned. Otherwise, the Israelis have been able to rescue 8 of them. They've killed dozens of them. I read a comment over the weekend from an Israeli defense official where he seemed to have, or she seemed to have, let slip that they may believe that it's only 30 hostages are left alive.
Oh,
and the way the comment was is that how else are we going to get these 30 back kind of thing? Were they talking about maybe the initial tranche was going to be 30, or is there only 30 left to get back in all? I mean, so which, that shouldn't surprise any of us, right? How could these people survive with that bombing,
all that bombardment?
Right? I mean, and so I think you also have to look at the cynicism here, the sheer Machiavellian brutality of a person like Netanyahu, a little softer on the American side. We don't expose this so much, but it's there as well. This idea that the dead hostages are good for our politics, right? Those dead hostages are good for keeping our base secure. I mean, you've seen in the last several days, hundreds of thousands of Israelis getting out on the streets. Now, we have to remember that hundreds of thousands of Israelis were out on the streets a year ago, prior to the October 7th attacks and then the start of this genocide. So this is really a continuation of that. And these people, of course, are not saying end this genocide. They're not saying we need a two-state solution. They are saying we need our people back. We need our hostages back. The latest polling I saw out of Israel was that nearly 75% of Israelis feel that the destruction in Gaza is either the right amount or needs more destruction. Right. Yeah. 3 out of 4 Israelis feel that way. So, this idea that a hostage is being killed, well, that might strengthen those who are against Netanyahu, but it also strengthens those who are for Netanyahu. And the idea that somehow these demonstrations are affecting Netanyahu politically, you see this in the way that he answers back, the way that he speaks to his base. No one will preach to me, meaning we are the righteous ones. We are the ones who have the authority here. We are the ones who are fulfilling what our destiny needs to be, getting the whole Zionist greater Israel.
And actually, I want to carry it just a little bit further, because it was certainly on the same day. I don't remember if it was on the same press conference he gave, but he also came really close to directly answering Biden. So you saw on the Biden clip there, he was directly asked, is Netanyahu doing enough? And he says, no, he's not doing enough. So the response to that question was this.
I was asked whether I'm not doing enough to the release of hostages. I want to ask you something. What has changed in the last 5 days? What has changed? One thing. These murderers executed 6 of our hostages. They shot them in the back of the head. That's what's changed. And now after this, we're asked to show seriousness? We're asked to make concessions? What message does this send Hamas? It says, kill more hostages, murder more hostages, you'll get more concessions. The pressure internationally must be directed at these killers, at Hamas, not at Israel. We say yes, they say no all the time, but they also murdered these people. And now we need maximum pressure on Hamas. I don't believe that either President Biden or anyone serious about achieving peace and achieving the release would seriously ask Israel to make these concessions. We've already made them. Hamas has to make the concession.
So a couple of things there, Matt. First of all, I think that it really underscores your point you just made, that the death of the hostages are a powerful tool for Netanyahu to continue doing what he's doing and not make concessions by shoveling all the responsibility onto Hamas. But the second thing is he, I think, just flat out lies when he says, we say yes all the time. It's Hamas that's saying no. So let's look at the factual evidence. Has Israel sought to have a ceasefire, sought to have a negotiated settlement, and it's those darn Hamas guys that are fouling it up?
It's been like a Peanuts cartoon, Danny, right? You mean where Lucy's got the football and Charlie Brown comes running up to kick it and she pulls it away, and then she says she won't do it and she does it again and so forth. That's what I feel like we're witnessing here with both the Americans and the Israelis. Tony Blinken, who is, someone asked the other day who's Israel's foreign minister, and somebody said Tony Blinken, and he wasn't incorrect. Israel Katz is, but I feel like Tony Blinken's doing a better job for Israel than Israel Katz is. But Yeah, I mean, what you've had repeatedly is, first of all, you don't see mention of a ceasefire by the Americans until, I would say, until the new year, until it seems apparent to the Democrats that this might be an issue for us in this election year. And so then starting after the new year, you start to see the White House and the administration start to talk more openly about a ceasefire. Of course, they're completely in cahoots with the Israelis. They are acting as Israel's negotiator, essentially. And then when things heighten around the time of the primaries and the uncommitted movement in the U.S. starts to show some strength, and the Democrats feel that political pressure, then you start to see Biden talking very forcibly about a ceasefire. You also, too, remember, go back to March, it's when Chuck Schumer and some other people say, you know what, maybe Netanyahu is not the best person to be leading Israel. So you start to see this fighting, this infighting between Netanyahu and the Democrats, because Netanyahu's genocide, Israel's genocide, is having an effect on the Democrats' political chances in 2024. But essentially, all the Democrats want is just to pay lip service to this, to make it seem as if they are really acting on it, to just put on a political display, do some theater. So what you have is you have had where, back in May, President Biden goes on television and he says, I have a new ceasefire agreement. This is going to work. The Israelis have agreed to it. This is an Israeli deal. We need Hamas to agree to it. And Hamas actually agrees to it. And then, of course, nothing gets done with it. And in July, the Americans come back and say, oh, we've got another ceasefire agreement. We need Hamas to agree to it because this is coming from the Israelis. The Israelis are on board. We need, right? And then, of course, Hamas accepts that July 2nd agreement. And what you just have is you have a continuation of the Israelis, first of all, really not speaking about openly in the way the Americans are about a ceasefire deal. The Americans are the ones coming and saying, this is the Israeli proposal. And then, of course, pulling that away, and either through an inaction or by changing the terms. So that's one thing we've seen continuing to happen is that the Israelis keep changing the terms. Hamas agrees to a framework for a ceasefire deal, and the Israelis change the terms. And now they've made it so that it's simply unacceptable. I wish I could remember off the top of my head, and maybe Gary could find it. It's a couple of days ago, but the Haaretz headline about how Netanyahu, his spins and his lies have finally torpedoed any chance for us to get the hostages back. So it's, it's been a clear act of just play, of theater.
Yeah. And actually, let me cut you off right there because I'm going to show you something in a minute where someone else is going to agree with you on that. But first of all, let me show you someone else who agrees with Netanyahu. And you talk about our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, carrying lots of water for Israel. He ain't the only one. Watch this one.
The kingpin of this, the orchestrator of what is taking place here is Iran. And that kind of direct pressure should have been applied and should be applied now. After all, we just lost an American citizen here.
Yes.
And we have every right to take action ourselves, as a result of this. And what are we doing? We're wringing our hands here, saying Netanyahu's got to do more. Well, he complied with the proposal. He agreed with it. So now what they want him to make? More concessions to Hamas. That's ridiculous just on the face of it.
Just on the face of it, it's ridiculous. So again, he's given Netanyahu's talking points. You heard him out of Netanyahu's own mouth, and now you've seen him out of Jack Keane. Of course, Jack Keane always runs straight to Iran, bomb Iran. Let's kill them. Let's move pressure on them, etc. That seems to be his solution to everything. But you see, he's just flat out saying, no, that everything is Hamas's fault. Israel's done nothing. So don't ask him to make concessions, which is the opposite of what the president's doing, of course. And then you still have this constant situation of noncompliance, and the killing goes on every day.
Yeah. Hey, first, I'm going to recommend that you and Gary go see a therapist because you guys obviously have some really troubling sadomasochistic tendencies because you're spending your time looking up those clips. So the self-harm
Right.
you're inflicting on yourselves by purposely going and saying, hey, let's see what Jack Keane said today. I'm a little concerned. But anyway, no, I mean, like, it's just one lie after another. It really is. I mean, this idea that somehow concessions to Hamas, Biden has been giving things away. I mean, I said this the other day on another program. This idea that somehow the Democrats say Trump will be worse on Palestine. And maybe we talked about this. How would that be possible? I mean, a sort of Trump dropping a nuclear weapon. I mean, we both know the Israeli military does not have the capacity because they're overstretched and they're exhausted. And the IDF is begging for a ceasefire because they are so overstretched and exhausted at this point. Israeli reservists are not signing back up. Not some of them, it's out of the moral repulsion of what's occurring there, but most of them is because they're exhausted. They've already been called up 2 or 3 times in the last 11 months. They just simply can't do it anymore. I mean, so you have this. What could Biden be doing more than he has been doing besides allowing for the Israelis to drop an atomic bomb, on Gaza? I mean, certainly the Israeli military does not have the capacity to drop any more bombs, and it's dropping right now. I don't know if we have the air and sea lift capacity to have sent more than we've already sent. We've sent 50,000 tons of munitions and military equipment, and vehicles, and so forth in the last 11 months. I'm not sure how much more we could have done than that.
I actually
like, so this idea that he's not done enough is just absolutely untrue. And the concessions, just what concessions have they made? Where has life gotten better for the Palestinians in Gaza? What concessions were made? That by, I mean, the only thing you can point to in the last 11 months that has been any degree of any semblance of a spot of humanity is in the last couple of days, as the Israelis have been they've been having these 8-hour pauses to allow for vaccination of children against polio. That's the only spot of decency you've seen. And even then, there's all kinds of complications, all kinds of context to it, but also, and as well, the fact that why is there polio? It's because the Israelis are carrying out a deliberate destruction of Gaza, including its health and sanitation system.
Right. And to your point a second ago, I saw it's been over 2 weeks ago, so I know the number's higher now. But as of the time of that report, there had been over 500 military transport aircraft that has delivered equipment, ammunition, etc., for the Israelis since this started. 500 of these, basically like 747 style for our civilian audience. I mean, we're talking huge transports, and that doesn't count anything that's come in via sea lift. So
yeah, that's been and from that report, what the Times of Israel put out, you're citing, because it had been the 500th flight had landed, and at that point there have been 107 ships.
Oh, 107. I missed that
107.
part.
So at least 3 or 4 more ships have come in that time. You all know how big a ship is. That 747 is big, but you ever seen our ships? Like I mean, like these things are, I mean, but when we do that math, right, Danny? I mean, 300 some odd days, 600 plus deliveries of munitions. You're talking about every 12 hours, there's been a weapons shipment from the United States to Israel since October 7th. Every 12 hours.
And that's not enough.
And that's not enough. I don't know if we could we do more? I'd love it if we've got folks here who are involved with the logistics side of things, that experience, have an understanding of that. Would it even be possible for us to do more without having to shut down operations in other parts of the world? And I'd love to know if maybe that happened at some point.
On a supply point of view, it's hard for me to understand how we can maintain that level at the same time we're apparently maintaining a high level of stuff for the Ukraine side. Right. I don't know where all this is coming from.
And what we're doing in the Red Sea, right? I mean, everything else
that's in the background now.
Right. And insurging aircraft right. Thanks, Gary. Right. And if people don't understand, when we talk about how this is breaking, the U.S. military is breaking down, we're exhausted, and how this is like giving, this is lending enthusiasm to America's adversaries. I mean, you just look at how overstretched we are. And great op-ed. I don't love the Wall Street Journal, as most of you probably know, but terrific op-ed in the Wall Street Journal yesterday by a man whose name I forget at this point. But he writes about the issue with the Navy's maritime civilian fleet, right? So the ships that actually provide the logistics, the sustainment, the refueling, and because of not just the issues with maintaining the ships and our slow and decrepit and corrupt shipbuilding program, but also too with maintaining, thanks, Gary, maintaining our civilian mariner force. We're decommissioning 17 support ships, not because they're old, not because they're outdated, but because we simply can't man them. So, I mean, this is not just speculation or hyperbole on our part that we're overstretched. I mean, this is stuff that the Wall Street Journal is reporting on. And, I mean, and for folks who are interested, who are listening and can't see this, in the journal, it was the U.S. Navy's chief suppliers in peril. And it was, I can't read the name, Crosby or Crowley or someone like that, but it's a very good informative article about just where the United States Navy is in terms of its ability to support itself. Not even talking about, Danny, as you were saying, supporting its missions around the world with respect to, things like supplying Israel.
Yeah. And there's the issue is, it gets a little bit broader than that. But I want to shift gears a little bit to something a little bit of sanity. I mean, let's just sprinkle in a little bit here, because there is one voice that kind of agrees with you, and you won't be surprised. It's Marwan Bishara, who lays it out very clearly about whether there genuinely is or is not a desire for a ceasefire in Israel.
We have a situation with the disease and the famine eating away at the people of Gaza. Netanyahu and Israel are taking their time. They're just basically playing everyone and procrastinating as much as they can, adding conditions here and there, and going back and forth between Cairo and Tel Aviv and Doha and Tel Aviv and Washington and Tel Aviv and so on and so forth, because they know two things are constant since the beginning of this genocide. One is that they can continue to kill and maybe kill and talk. Two, that the United States will continue to provide them with all the weapons needed. So when the United States, as the negotiations start, give $20 billion to Israel, Israel is in no rush whatsoever, is under no pressure whatsoever.
Hard to add on to that, but you see that he's right. I mean, he's despite what Biden says, despite what Keane says, and all these other people, Israel, there's no evidence that they even want a ceasefire.
No, I mean, you had over the weekend in Israel, the cabinet voted on this the main sticking point that's in the headlines now. And if you read or listen to Gideon Levy, he explains how this idea of the Philadelphia corridor being a sticking point is like it's just being utilized, for political purposes, to avoid a ceasefire deal, to avoid any semblance of anything that would stop the genocide. Even for a temporary period. But if you looked at the Israeli cabinet this weekend voted on whether or not to keep Israeli forces in that border between Gaza and Egypt, which is known as the Philadelphia corridor. And, it's an 8-1 vote supporting Netanyahu to keep forces there. The lone exception was Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, representing the interests of the IDF, again, who are tired, exhausted, they need a pause. And General Halevi, the IDF chief of staff, so the head Israeli man in uniform, he kind of let the cat out of the bag. And I think this is something that's being discussed in Israel. We may not be seeing it here, but this idea that just get the ceasefire, give us 6 weeks to rearm, to reorganize, to refit, to reposition, get our people back, and then we can go back in. So even though there was one vote in the Israeli cabinet from the defense minister about not maintaining troops there, which of course which is a complete deal breaker for any type of ceasefire negotiations with the Palestinians, that vote was very deceptive. It was deceitful. It's along the lines of, we need this time for ourselves so that we can better reposition ourselves to go on with the killing, and when we can go back in. So, I mean, there is not an interest in ending the genocide. There is not an interest in any type of political settlement that would bring about the stability and the security that Israel needs. And it's a fever that is throughout the entire Israeli government. I mean, this is something the entire cabinet voted against any proposal for a two-state solution. Nearly the entire Knesset voted against the two-state solution. I mean, it's clear, and it's clear also too that the Israeli public are dead set against that as well. I mean, so they're willing to continue to pursue this dream, this destiny of greater Israel, even though it's eating themselves. They're eating themselves from the inside with this.
And Matt, I want to point out here, because I think it's really important to highlight at this point. So that's the reality. And you just talked about this stuff. That's not secret. That's not what people are saying behind closed doors. Those are public votes. And this is what the people think. This is what their government leaders are articulating and say they want, which is in direct contradiction to stated American policy objectives, which is a two-state solution and a ceasefire. Everything that we're lobbying for, they are openly against. And you saw Netanyahu a minute ago just absolutely categorically say, I will not compromise, and no one is going to preach to me otherwise. So he has absolutely laid down the law here. Now then you have, and I think this is on the same day that Netanyahu said this, you had Matt Miller, who was asked a couple of hard questions, and watch him dance around it.
Yeah.
There are dozens of hostages still remaining in Gaza, still waiting for a deal that will bring them home. It is time to finalize that deal. Over the coming days, the United States will continue to engage with our partners in the region to push for a final agreement. During talks last week, we made progress on dealing with the obstacles that remain, but ultimately, finalizing an agreement will require both sides to show flexibility. It will require that both sides look for reasons to get to yes, rather than reasons to say no. We did have constructive talks last week in the region to try and reach agreement on the final gaps. I think, as you heard the secretary say when he was in the region several weeks ago, Israel had agreed to the bridging proposal, but that's not the end of the road. There are a number of important implementing details that require agreement to implement that bridging proposal, and that's what we're trying to get agreement on.
Okay, and for those who may not know, I want to real quick show when he cited that Secretary of State got the Israeli side to agree to a bridging proposal. Here's what he said.
In a very constructive meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu today, he confirmed to me that Israel accepts the bridging proposal, that he supports it. It's now incumbent on Hamas to do the same. Okay,
Miller's wrong and Blinken's wrong. They didn't agree to anything. In fact, Netanyahu said, no, I didn't agree to the bridging proposal. Right. But yet we keep going on there. So what do you make of this when you see the U.S. government openly advocating for policies that the Israeli side openly repudiates? What are we trying to do here?
And this is larger than just the violence, the killing and destruction in Gaza right now that a ceasefire would hopefully end. It's the bigger picture of this issue, right? Where the administration and the Democratic Party still profess that there is a pathway to a two-state solution. Ignoring, what we just talked about, how the entire government and the Israeli and the entire possibility of a future government and the Israeli public are dead set against a two-state solution. The Palestinians are open to a two-state solution. That's what they've been asking for forever, and, including Hamas. And if people don't understand that, they need to read more about this and not just listen to people like Jack Keane on Fox News. But the willingness of our administration and the Democratic Party to just continue to put forward these lies. I'll say, as reprehensible as they are, at least the Republicans are honest and open about this. Donald Trump's ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, has a book out now, and he openly states in the book, Trump's purpose should be to subsidize the Israelis' West Bank, the Israeli annexation of the West Bank. Right. So at least they're open. If Trump puts Jared Kushner back in charge of Middle Eastern policy, exactly what he's going to do, and he's not going to lie about it. So this is what we're up against. We're up against a worse situation than the Republicans and the Trump administration, because at least they're straightforward in their support of atrocity and war crimes. Right. They're not They're not dressing it up. They're not using euphemisms or lying about it. While with these people here in power now, you have to just pretend that they're actually speaking reality to you. I mean, so how do you deal with this? How do you deal with this administration that will not openly and honestly detail what is actually occurring there? So that the great example of that bridging proposal, first of all, I don't think they ever said what the details of the bridging proposal were. I don't know. I never saw anything about that. If people have seen it, please put it in the comments, but I don't think we ever saw what the exact real details of the bridging proposal were. They also used incredible weasel language when they put forward this bridging proposal, whether it was in the administration or in the Democratic Party. When they were talking about this, they said things that like the bridging proposal reflects the values that were in Joe Biden's May ceasefire agreement. I mean, come on. It reflects the values. It means, it doesn't, that means it's written in the same times 12 font. That's about the only similarity you're going to have there. Right. I mean, this exasperation that we're all feeling here, because again, if it was a Trump administration, at least we could be arguing with them and trying to do something about something that they're being honest about. But these people here are lying as they're carrying out a genocide themselves. And they can't even get their lies straight with the Israelis, which shows just how weak and powerless ultimately this administration is. Because Netanyahu, I think when you're showing the clips before, Danny, of Netanyahu being angry, he was upset at the umbrage that he, this violation of his power expressed by the Americans. And so he needs to put them back in their place. Hey, Joe Biden, your party has a very close election coming up in 3 months. You better get back in line. That's essentially what Netanyahu is saying.
And look, some of these within the Israeli lobby have demonstrated very powerfully they do have the ability to skew elections, with 2 Democratic members having been voted out in the primary season. That they put millions of dollars behind that. So it's not an empty threat, and they have made good on it.
No, as of a couple of weeks ago, AIPAC had already spent $100 million on congressional elections. $100 million already, and it wasn't even Labor Day yet. So you hadn't even gotten into the full campaign season yet, right? I mean, now, of course, the way the American electoral system works, the primaries often tend to be more important in terms of rather than general elections, because we have such a gerrymandered and corrupt system here. But you saw that where they made examples of Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman. You see how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is handling all this. I mean, she has completely sold out any degree of respectability. The woman has no integrity whatsoever. I don't believe she has shown up to one pro-Palestine, anti-genocide event or rally or march. I don't remember her going to, say, Columbia University to support the students. She'll say things that are lukewarm, vague. Certainly, she's not wearing a keffiyeh or standing alongside Rashida Tlaib with a Palestinian flag. And this is supposed to be the most progressive, fierce member of Congress, who also is insulated because of her demographic and because of her district. And she has basically shut up about this in a way that is just absolutely pathetic. And so you see the power of that lobby if they're able to not only punish members of Congress step out of line, but also to muzzle those and frighten those and make those obey. Because the way people understand the way it works is that, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, they'll let their people speak to a degree. They'll let their people, right? I mean, so AOC will say, I have a perfect voting record, or I am, she doesn't have a perfect voting record, but I am one of the most highly rated, in terms of my record on Palestine, I'm one of the most highly rated members of Congress. People, they get those scorecards. She's at the top of that, which isn't saying much, of course, right? Look at this relatively. But yeah, exactly. But, but at the same time too, okay, what speeches have you made at any Palestine events? What have you attended the marches? I mean, they have them every week in New York. What did you do to show your solidarity with the students at Columbia or NYU or City University? So you see the power of that lobby not just in the way it controls those who are already in agreement with them, right? I mean, Joe Biden likes to say he's the biggest Zionist in Washington, D.C., right? You see how controlled he is.
Yeah.
You can understand the control they could have in an election where it's a tight election, but in something where, even someone like who is supposedly insulated from their power is.
And by the way, this is a good point here. Let me give you an example of maybe even self-censorship. So the British made some surprising headlines a couple of days ago when they announced that there were several categories of weapons and ammunition that they are going to ban from going to Israel. It's not a huge percentage, but it's something, because they said they can't be sure that those would not be used to violate human rights abuses by the Israelis against the Palestinian people. And of course, Netanyahu went crazy about that or whatever. Well, Matt Miller was asked, hey, where's the United States stand on that? And are they going to do the same thing? Here's what he said.
We haven't made any final determinations or any final conclusions yet. What we are doing is going and looking at specific incidents to make specific judgments on those specific incidents, find if they have been remediated, if there were violations of international humanitarian law in specific incidents, what are the actions that Israel took, if any? And you have to answer those two questions before you can make those determinations under United States law. That's what we're doing.
Well, can you give us the timeline when those assessments
will get them? We will get them completed. We will get them completed as soon as possible.
Okay. 11 months of war. The ICJ and all kinds of other bands have said that there is legitimate reason to think that there may be a genocide going on. You have your eyeballs. You could just look and see and hear now. Even after Britain has made some actions here, you have the United States say, well, we're looking into this, but we're going to keep giving the bombs.
Daddy, I'm going to be optimistic here. And I look at Matt Miller and it gives me hope for the future, in the sense that watching Matt Miller work, it means to me that robots, AI, computers will never be able to fully replace us, because there's no machine that could ever have that lack of integrity, right? No machine could ever be programmed to disassemble, right? Delay, right? I mean, like lie, deflect, the way that Matt Miller does. It's just no operating system would be able to handle that. It would blow up, right? If it tried to do that. So, but anyway, it is. I mean, like, well, with the British decision, it's not black and white. It's a mix of different things. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's meaningless. The U.S. provides about 70% of the weapons to Israel. Germany provides like 28 or 29%. The rest of the world provides 1 or 2%. And Brits are part of that, and they only blocked 30 out of 350 licenses to Israel. They excluded from that ban, from that block, components for the F-35. They made some specious argument that we can't determine which parts actually go to Israel, which, if you read what people like Josh Paul say, who was intimately involved in the arms trade until he resigned in protest from the State Department back in October over all this, that's absolutely untrue. There's a whole very easy to determine which parts go to which country. It is ultimately meaningless, but it does at the same time too. The conservative government in London, in Britain, would not have done this at all. So while the Labour Party and Keir Starmer are far from perfect, the fact that they actually caved a little bit to pressure and had to admit that Israel is committing violations of international law, that shows what political pressure does. We've got to look at it in the sense of, ultimately this is meaningless. Of course, the Israelis are upset. Again, they get upset about everything. That's part of what they do to keep people in check, right? This is what keeps, say, the media in check. The New York Times self-censors because they're afraid of getting attacked by the Israeli lobby, right? They're afraid of, like, if I say genocide, we are going to get flooded with 25,000 emails today, and our editor is going to have to go speak to so-and-so about it, right? I just don't need that. So I'll say alleged war crimes or something rather than genocide, right? We have to look at it in both lenses, in the sense of, it's meaningless as a political gesture, but also too, they didn't have to do that. And certainly the Tories would not have done that.
Yeah, but we're not even going to do that. We're, you see that the U.S. government and a lot of those headlines Gary's putting up there shows if Kamala Harris wins, that it'll just be seamless transition into the same thing going forward. She's not going to change anything there. I want to end the show today by bringing something up that someone sent to me this morning from 1991. It's a newspaper article, and it's like, wow. Okay, it's 1991. That's not that long ago. But for those who may not be able to read this small print, it says Prime Minister Yitzhak Shamir, recalling his days as a guerrilla commander, said yesterday that Jews were justified in using terrorism to win statehood, but that the Palestinians are not. Personal terrorism, quote, is a way of fighting that is acceptable under certain conditions and by certain movements, said Shamir. The Jews, stateless and persecuted, had no choice, he said, but the Palestinians are, quote, fighting for land that's not theirs. This is the land of the people of Israel, end quote. Shamir was interviewed by Army Radio on the 50th anniversary of the founding of Lehi, the group in which Shamir fought against British rule in Palestine in the 1940s. So here's this guy that fought against the British with using lots of terrorism opportunities there, claims that no, it's the Israel's land, so it's okay for them to use terrorism. This was at the time publicized. Now, how much difference do you think Benjamin Netanyahu, who first came to power not too many years after this, has a different view on that?
Yeah, I think the idea that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter is inherently true. And, looking at what side you're on and how it's acceptable to. But
I think it's important here, Matt. He's not even saying we're freedom fighters. He's saying he used the word terrorism on our side is okay.
Right.
That's shocking.
Yeah. It also shows, though, how they are driven by this entitlement. They believe, essentially a magical real estate agent in the sky 2,500 years ago wrote in a book that this land is theirs. And so be it. And that gives them carte blanche. That gives them the right to commit terror. Their terror is justified. Their terror is holy, right? Their terror is righteous. And the what I worry about with Israel, and we've seen this from commentary coming from Israelis, especially say Ronan Bar, the head of Shin Bet, who wrote this in a letter about the danger of Jewish terror. So we saw this week several 100,000 people on the streets protesting against Netanyahu, demanding a ceasefire deal, not on the side of the Palestinians. They want the ethnic cleansing and genocide to go on. They just want their people back. I can't emphasize that enough, right? But, what's also true is that they say there are 750,000 people on the streets protesting. There are 750,000 armed Jewish settlers who see those people as traitors, who see those people as betraying their cause, betraying their divine right to the land by conceding anything that remotely resembles acquiescence to the enemy, to the other, right? And that's what you see in Israel is this tension between the country, this split that is fracturing across multiple lines. But certainly one of the things that's true, and I think we're being misinformed here in the U.S. at the political state of Benjamin Netanyahu. He is, if most recent polling I saw, which was a couple months ago, so maybe it's changed, but he is the most popular politician in Israel. I mean, if you give a list of who the leaders of the parties are, Netanyahu comes out at top. Now, he's got less than a third because there are multiple parties and multiple choices, right? It's not one or two choices like we have here. It's but that third or less than a third of the Israeli public believe in Netanyahu. He is their leader. And so if elections do occur, and I think elections, I haven't heard about this, but elections have been scheduled for October at one point. If he loses, and has to leave that chair, what happens? Does he do so willingly? Let alone the fact that things are so fractured there. Could anyone who comes into power form a government? And so even though if you had elections at this point, I don't know how likely it is that Netanyahu's out of power because his
look,
base is so supportive.
I saw a poll last week that said if the elections were held on the day they did their polling, Netanyahu's party would win a majority.
Yeah.
Even with this situation, even with all the things you're talking about, if it was held right now, he is on track, his party, to win the elections, and that is really telling. Listen, let me ask you this as we close here today. We've kind of laid out a situation here where you see the Israeli electorate itself and politically and otherwise is really split on this area, because there are a lot of Jews who are very much for the Palestinian people and care about them, etc. Even if they're a minority, they're still a pretty sizable minority. And then you have, in the region, you have all these different things pulling in different directions. You have Netanyahu continuing to go on, try to, quote, win the war against Palestine, which he's never going to do, because he's creating more enemies than he's ever going to get off the battlefield. It's worse today than it was on October 7th of last year. He also can't bring his people back into the northern part of Israel unless he eliminates the threat from Hezbollah, which many in the Israeli Defense Forces want to solve militarily. You still are waiting to see what Iran's going to do because of the last thing that Israel did, where they assassinated Hania in Tehran. So you have all of this cauldron boiling. How in God's name can this thing resolve? And how do you see it playing out given the realities on the ground?
I don't know. I don't know, Danny. And you saw Hezbollah launched 65 rockets at Israel last night. So much for all the folks here in the U.S. who are saying, oh, Israel's preemptive strike, Hezbollah learned their lesson, et cetera, or they've basically agreed not to do it anymore. I mean, so many people just have no idea what they're talking about. It's very frustrating. And, they're the ones who seem to populate our major media. But it's, that rant aside, I don't know. I mean, you look at what you said there as well, the Iraqi resistance that launched a drone in the last day or so at Israel. You have, of course, what the Yemenis are doing in the Red Sea. I mean, if you look at that map that Gary put up of the U.S. naval forces in the region, looks like we've retreated out of the Red Sea. Looks like we don't have anyone in the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden. Right. I mean, so looks like the Yemenis have essentially won the great sea war of 2024. I mean, I'm sure we have assets there. I'm sure we have our aircraft and our drones in the area. But in terms of where we were, say, 8 months ago, when we launched this coalition to defeat Ansar Allah, to defeat the Houthis, and it looks like we lost that battle. I mean, so I think it looks more like that. It's more blustering, more shows of force, people being killed for no purpose or change or benefit, and then a quiet retreat. And then I think that cycle continues. And in the meantime, this is what I would do if I went in to advise the Iranians or Hezbollah or whoever, the axis of resistance, and I'm sure I think this is what they're doing. Play the long game, continue to exhaust Israel. I mean, there is just story after story coming out of Israel about their economic plight, about the flight of capital from Israel, about how investors are not putting money into Israel, about how Israeli businesses are going out of business. You mentioned the North, the people not being able to go home. There are people in the South who haven't been able to go home. It's about 150, 200,000 internally displaced people in Israel. I mean, again, the Israeli Jewish population is only 7 or 8 million. That's a huge amount of people. We spoke before about the reservists who are starting now to refuse being called up because they're exhausted. They can't continue to do this. I mean, but the toll that has on the economy. I just saw the numbers for tourism for Israel. The first half of 2024, Israeli tourism was down. It was 1/4 of what it was for the first half of 2023. I mean, so the economic strain on Israel, but they've got the support of the United States. They've got the support of the treasury. I think this may be why the Israelis get so upset when any American seems to step out of line, because this is their lifeline. And so I think what happens is this continual erosion, this continual weakening, this continual political fracturing within Israel, which of course can become violent. But as long as they have the backing of the United States, they can continue to survive. It'll keep the balloon inflated as long as that positive air pressure is coming in, i.e. American dollars.
So that you've articulated all the stuff around. What about the Palestinians? How long can they keep going, getting killed every day?
It doesn't get any better. It doesn't get any better. I don't see how it gets any better. And I think this is what drives externally other nations to do things. I think this is one of the things that you saw this weekend where Turkey is joining BRICS or putting in an application to join BRICS.
Yeah.
I think the Turks are going to get a nuclear weapon because right now the only thing that's keeping Turkey possibly, I mean, Erdogan said a lot, so whether or not he actually, but you could imagine what keeps Turkey from acting militarily is the fact that one, Israel has the United States on its side, and Turkey really doesn't have anyone on its side comparably. So why not get into a better relationship with Russia and China and India, Iran, other stronger powers? And then as you watch the American empire also decline. But then the other thing too is that Israel's got nuclear weapons. So are you really going to risk, say, Ankara to defend if Israel had nuclear weapons? I think you might see a Turkish air patrol over Beirut, say, right? I mean, like that's possible. I mean, something like that, but they don't have nuclear weapons. And does anyone think the Israelis won't use nuclear weapons? Come on. I mean, so, for the Palestinians, and who's going to step in and defend them? Who's going to protect them? So, what was it? I think it's Thucydides who said, strong do what they want and the weak suffer as they must. Right. I think that's the issue for the Palestinians, because even with, say, things just going completely to pot in Israel, say there's a civil war in Israel, it gets so bad, a civil war breaks out. The Palestinians are still going to suffer. I mean, it's kind of like during the American Civil War, did our indigenous people, did our Native Americans prosper during that? No, absolutely not. They're still going to be victimized, brutalized. And when opportunities come up, those will be taken advantage of, as we're seeing now. We didn't even talk about the West Bank, as we're seeing now occur in the West Bank, where I think we're beginning to see a slow motion, very localized, micro genocide occurring there, where the Israelis are going to go one community to another, these larger camps, these cities, and make them uninhabitable, as they're doing now, as we're seeing in Tulkarm or in Jenin. And I think that's the play of the Palestinians. Maybe.
I guess we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But really appreciate you coming on today and just giving us the moral clarity of what the truth is. And we just have to keep hoping that at some point, just kind of base human morality can put enough pressure on these politicians to do something that makes sense and to end this senseless large scale killing. But that's for another day here. Appreciate you coming on. Also, appreciate you guys watching on. Just want you to know, we also have some big events breaking in the Russia-Ukraine war, and we're going to have John Mearsheimer come on today at 1:00. He's going to talk about that. Zelensky has fired a whole series of cabinet officials. And all kinds of things keep happening in the Ukraine war there. That's going to cause some real problems, and we're going to have John break that down. And then Larry Johnson will be back on at 3:00 to look at a different aspect of that. Always great to see from both of those. Always wonder what kind of shirt Larry's going to wear. We'll have to wait and see. Tune in at 3:00 to see it then, and we'll see you on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.